Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassa. Good evening, everyone from the online community. Hope you're well. So first of all, again, this question, how does one weaken ego? How to practice that informal practice in daily life? I think the ego would be it's not a Pali word, is it? But just a sense of, when Luangpor Viradhammo would say, dua gu korn gu, is that the idea of ego? Is it? Yeah? What does it actually mean? Sounds like glue. Dua gu korn. Is there a translation in English of that, or ego? Mind, the sense of mind. Okay. So, but what for sure, whatever words we have, we can see that there is this, I like this word, ahankara mimankara, I making, my making. I can really relate to that when when the mind is creating a sense of me with a problem or an issue or, and so on. So the classic way to deal with that is to ask as I said earlier, the question, who is thinking? And, that's very, very effective if you don't try to find an answer. If you try to find an answer, who, you go nuts, because there is no one there. There's simply ida pachayata. There are causes and conditions creating a self-sense. It's certainly a sense of a self, but when you look carefully at it, it disappears because there's no real kernel or essence to it. So the question who is classically used, who is thinking? And the challenge there is to just wait. But if you're trying to find something, you'll get really, really frustrated. So that's the downside of that question. You say, who is thinking? Yeah, who is thinking? Am I thinking? And you don't get it. But if you just like look at the very I making, mind making as an object, which is what the question who is supposed to do. Who's thinking? Your mind will be silent, but then it'll come up again. So the idea is to, and that's a kind of a good way to maybe think about the mind observing the mind, or the mind knowing the mind, because it's a direct inquiry. Who's thinking? And then the mind will be silent. You just wait. And it's the waiting that's the secret. And it's the same as Luangpor's Sumedho's. It's like this. These questions are always leading to the same sense of presence. So the ahankara mimankara is the attached habit of self-identity, the attached habit of a sense of self. And I think most of us, when we experience it, we try to get rid of it. We shut up and we be quiet, leave me alone. I've had enough of your nonsense. And then that's where the sense of a kind regard would be important. So who's there? Rather than who's there? Get out of my life. Again, you can bring dosa or vibhava tanha in all kinds of ways. You can say, I love you, you creep, get out of here. It's sort of like, so the mind is sneaky. It'll use its delusions with us, with good language. So people, all of us have probably tried to use metta bhavana to get rid of anger, right? And you think, it's a contradiction actually to get rid of something with love. It doesn't compute, but so we think that there's some kind of replacement philosophy. So I hate you, so I'll love you. Of course, it doesn't work. But if you recognize, hatred feels this way, then that's the beginning of kindness. And then eventually you can forgive and so on. So anyway, if you see there's a lot of ahankara mimamkara going on, and for most of us that is a given, it's the way life is, try that. Just try, well, who's thinking? But you have to be very persistent, consistent, and not trying to get something. So that kind of, no, trying. I suffered a lot in that one because I would read texts or from other traditions, especially from Sri Ramana, and then I'd realize the guy's enlightened, the man's enlightened, he's a saint. And then I'd read about his experiences or Luangpor Liam's experiences. And of course I'd be very inspired. But then I'd have that perception, I want that experience. And then I would use the who to try to get that experience, which was again tanha. It wasn't pure attention. It is effective if it's used without craving. All these things are effective if they're used with craving and you don't see it, then you'll be frustrated. And the frustration will eventually show you your error, what you're doing wrong. So give that a go if you want. But the more serious question was, again, very difficult, how to deal with sustained paranoid jealousy to those we deeply care about. Again, if it's a kind of injury from childhood or from war or some deep insecurity for deeply psychological reasons, and the person isn't aware of that, and so on, if there's kind of work for therapy there, that would be possible. But in terms of Theravada Buddhism, then the thing, if you use the Four Noble Truths, the feeling of paranoia would not be the problem. It would be the desire not to have the feeling of paranoia. That would be hard to discern because the feeling of paranoia would be so profoundly unpleasant. You can't even describe that as unpleasant, just so profoundly horrible. So the Vedana of this emotion would be hugely unpleasant. And then with a hugely, just like if you chopped your foot with an axe or something like that, you're kind of chopping your heart with it, it's very bad. So then the tanha would be also profoundly deep to get rid of it. And you'd have to somehow, in Theravada, if you use the Four Noble Truths, that the problem is not the sankhara, but the problem is the desire not to have the sankhara. But if some Ajahn said to this lady, oh, it's just a sankhara, she should kill him. Because it's not just a sankhara, it's loaded with all kinds of history or whatever. In Four Noble Truths, what the person would have to say is, suffering is like this. So first of all, Four Noble Truths, it's a depersonalization of something which is actually highly personal. So that's quite important that, like the many things that I've learned in Dhamma, that's what when Luangpor Sumedho indicated the profundity of that, when the first noble truth is not that I am suffering, there is suffering. That's a big difference. Oh, I'm suffering. I've got this terrible mood. What am I going to do? Is not observing the mood. It's being caught in the ahankara mimamkara. But to actually have enough mindfulness to say, oh, this really hurts. Hurts feels like this. That's the beginning of the Four Noble Truths. So we say, suffering, there is suffering. Suffering has been understood. It has to be understood. Suffering has been understood. There's three parts. And the way Luangpor Sumedho would parse that out, he'd say, understand is to stand under. That's kind of an interesting way to put it. In other words, you're accepting it into the mind. Okay, I understand that I'm standing under it. I'm accepting it into consciousness. That is a huge thing for this kind of experience. That's the nature of the Four Noble Truths. Then samudaya would become possible, and samudaya is that has a cause. It begins, it arises, it's not eternal, and that cause is attachment to tanha. So if the person got that far with it, then they could ask the question, well, what do I want that I don't have? What do I have that I don't want? And it would be obvious, I do not want this emotion. And if they could get that far, then in terms of the Four Noble Truths, they're actually diagnosing the problem correctly. That the anusaya, or the emotion, comes up for causes and conditions which are known or unknown, but the person hasn't willed it, doesn't want it, so it comes up on its own according to causes and conditions. So that is not the problem. Problem is the attachment to the craving, and you can see how difficult it would be to do that. But if the person can then say, I don't want this, they can make that observation, or then they might get the insight, well, I have to welcome it. I have to welcome it to balance my desire to get rid of it. And welcoming is, oh, great, I've got paranoia. Great, it's going to be a good day today. Fun, huh? I'm going to really be paranoid. It's not that kind of welcoming. It's not a party. It's a burning. It's like really the mind is burning with this thing, and person has the capacity to allow it into consciousness. And this is where therapies can be very helpful, because a person can get overwhelmed with that if they don't understand it. So this kind, you really need kalyanamitta. You need friendships to walk you through and talk and so on. Because there is the idea in therapy of re-traumatizing the mind. So if the mind's been traumatized in childhood, and then in adulthood, these PTSD for, like, say, we have 3 people that come to the monastery, Canadian, who were soldiers in Afghanistan when they were chasing bin Laden, and they all have PTSD, and they have flashbacks and things like that, and they have very, very good counseling, and in talking with them and thinking about this kind of severe trauma to the mind, then the memories come up, and the person feels like they're on the battlefield. Actually, the memory is so strong, they can smell the gunpowder, whatever they use. Imagine, and actually have visual images. So that is not just a little memory, and that's a traumatized memory. So the therapist then can walk them through to help them begin to see, no, that's not who you are. That's an object. That takes a lot of skill. And I'm told then that a person could get re-traumatized because they just fall back into that as a kind of reality. So these are, there can be very heavy injury to the heart and to the mind. And so although the Four Noble Truths are correct, their application has to be sometimes moderated with a lot of care and consideration. But in any way, if you take the theory, then the person would have to be able to kind of go from vibhava tanha, not wanting, to a sense, I accept this. I accept this. I accept this. And in the acceptance, the feeling of, in this case, paranoia, would become more objective. The person would see it more as an object rather than be the subject. Oh gosh, there it is again. What am I going to do with it? The ahankara mimamkara. And then if one could witness it more and more, then the sati is becoming more powerful, and the belief in the mood is less strong, and so the feeding of that as a reality begins to fall away. Could take a long time. Reasonably, it would take a long time. It wouldn't be easy. So then you take it to Nirodha, and Nirodha would be where, you see, Nirodha is the cessation of the craving. It's not necessarily the cessation of the unpleasant. So the question that comes, and I wanted to say subsequently, does Nirodha cover any dukkha? No one size fits all. For example, when my dog died, I felt very sad what to do. Go out and get another dog? That does not seem right. I will suffer and be sad again when the dog dies. I stayed with my sadness after I buried the first one and sent her the merit by visiting the temple nearby and fed the dogs around the perimeter. And that eased my pain and suffering a bit. I figured this out myself. No suggestion in any textbooks. This is a misunderstanding of Nirodha. Nirodha is not the end of Vedana. Nirodha is the end of craving. So people mistake that because we use the word dukkha in various ways. We have dukkha vedana. So if I drop this bottle on my foot, I have dukkha vedana, whether I'm an arahant or not, and I'm not. It's just because the foot is biologically made to feel pain. It's a good thing, because then I can go to the hospital and get my toe fixed or whatever. But dukkha in the Four Noble Truths is the end of suffering, is the end of craving. And that's actually a very deep issue. It's not just, the craving for food. It's the whole sense of being separate, being an individual, being born in time. So the end of craving is a deep, deep issue. It gets more and more subtle and more profound. The sense of me doing something to become something is a part of the whole Vedana package. So in terms of this person, I would say, I don't know what, they're perceiving that the pain of loss ceased, and that's Nirodha. No. The pain, the grief is just a natural condition. When you love Bruno, and when Bruno dies, then we'll feel sad. That's not delusion. That's human. You have to think, like, imagine your mother dies, and you say, "Choy choy." That would be awful. Choy choy means indifference to those who are. Thank you very much. And that's sometimes an idea that we have, that like upekkha and nirodha means nothing. But is that true? I don't, the fact that one has a mother and there's love, and then grief would be quite natural. So what's wrong with grief? Nothing wrong with grief. It's kind of normal. So I think this person thinks that nirodha is like the end of grief. No. If you get a dog, you love the dog dies, you feel grief. This is natural. So when you get the dog, realize you're going to suffer. But love it anyway. So like, would you not have a dog then? Yeah, I don't want to suffer. Well, go ahead and live in a cave. Have no loving relationships. Don't do anything beautiful. Definitely don't eat good food because you're going to suffer. And who wants to live like that? I don't know. So if you have loving relationships, like a mother or a father and the kids, then when they die, you'll feel sad. So what's the attachment? The attachment would be not wanting the sadness. So that would be maybe, so classically what would happen, it would be someone would, like the situation in Ottawa, that I spoke about earlier. One person in family is really grieving and bringing up the grief and very mindful and practicing with it. The other person is saying, nothing wrong, nothing wrong. I'm fine. Don't talk to me. I'm fine. Oh, not fine. So there is vibhava tanha as repression. Push it all down. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. It's going to explode eventually. It's got to. So the grief is okay. It's the vibhava tanha. Or the other is where one just starts to feel sorry for themselves. That's a hankering monker. Oh, terrible, my dog's died. Oh my gosh, it's worse than Gaza. I, I've lost my dog. It's just not fair. You're such a lovely dog. Poor dog, just so. And does that for 10 years. That's attachment. Has a sense of a self. Me, poor me. But grief itself is a sankhara. It arises according to cause and conditions. If we feel it, actually, if we take it in a Buddhist way, then we try to take those feelings. We say, yeah, everyone who loses their dog and loves their dog feels like this. And then we universalize. We bring our, you bring your mind to compassion. Yeah. Yeah. With love, there is this and a kind of unity of our experience. And that's really skillful. That's really skillful. So the use of the Four Noble Truths is this it's it is a diagnosis of the problem, and the Buddha it calls it a kind of medical analogy. You have to be quite intelligent, and that's why the questioning, the capacity to inquire is important. You just believe in the Four Noble Truths, then you get these kind of misunderstandings, which is not really the Four Noble Truths. So for the person with the deep paranoia, that would be the inquiry they'd have to do. Now, if they can do that inquiry, that means they're more objective. Usually they're just so lost in the ahankara mimamkara that the capacity to inquire is not there. And if you cannot inquire, then you cannot really see this as an object. And so how can you facilitate inquiry? You have a friend who knows how to draw out of you through their questions, how do you feel? And the friend points back, and how does that feel? And does your body feel tense when you feel that? And are there strong memories? And they help the person suffering to be aware of this in a more objective way. That's a good friend. I don't think a good friend, a bad friend would be, my God, you've got this issue. You are paranoid. You are really, really paranoid. They would create a self around that. I mean, you're in bad shape. It's really terrible. Rather than say, what does it feel like to be paranoid? And that's Kalyanamitta. Kalyanamitta in this case is a person who can hear the suffering and try to depersonalize it. See it as an object. That's what good counseling is about, right? Good listening. And then somehow say to the person, can you accept it? Does it come up in the mornings? Do you notice it in the morning? And whatever it might be. So that's the kind of basic question of like throughout the day, Theravada Buddhism, whenever you feel any discontent doesn't have to be major, just any, you say, oh, this is discontent. That's why we have that kind of language. And then you kind of say, well, what do I want? And what do I not want? You get very good at that kind of inquiry. So someone is like one of these air conditioners starts to rattle. Rattle. You're sitting there and you're feeling discontent. And you say, why don't they fix it? What kind of a play? Why don't they fix it? It's broken. Why don't they fix it? That's not sati. That's complaining. And complaining is attachment to not getting what you want. That's called complaining. Why don't they fix it? Why isn't there more salad? Or whatever. And then you say, oh, discontent. I feel discontent. What do I want that I don't have? What do I have that I don't want? And then you listen. You listen to the sound. Oh, yeah, I don't like that. Oh, that's the Vedana. The Vedana feels this way. It's just like this. And then you see the resistance to it. You know, it's like it's sharp or it's loud. Oh, okay, that's the resistance. Oh, okay, I'll just be with the resistance. So now you're looking at tanha right with the sound, right there. There's a sound. Okay, the sound is the sound. And what am I adding to it? I'm adding my not wanting to it. And that's a mind state. So if you're practicing Bahiya Sutta, in the listening, there's just the listening. You've done that for a while. And then a sound comes up, which is clatter, 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 clatter. You can see, well, that's still a sound, and it just changed. But what happened? My mind got into dosa, not liking, not wanting. And you can see, well, that's something I'm creating. That's not Dhamma. That's just what I'm creating. And you get some insight. You get some insight of how that works. It might not be much, but any insight into the Four Noble Truths helps you throughout your path. Obviously, you just get better and better at it. So by doing the idea, like the Bahiya Sutta, where in listening, there's just listening. In touching, there's just touching. There's simple things like that. Yeah, well, that's Dhamma. That's Dhammacha. That's nature. So, like, if I listen to the sound, that's nature. And then, what am I adding to nature? The complaining, the worry, blah blah blah. And how does that keep manifesting? Ahankara mimankara. So, if the ahankara mimankara is just like habit, you can go right to it. Who's thinking? And the mind is silent. If the ahankara mimankara is driven by something like that, it's a lot more work. Same theory. And then you do lots of body meditation. You really kind of get into the body, feel it in the body, and things like that.